Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. I'm Mark Labberton. Welcome to Conversing. For the second week in a row, we have the opportunity of welcoming David Brooks as our guest on Conversing. David, again, will be known to many of you, but he is best known probably as an opinion writer for the New York Times and as a contributing writer at The Atlantic. He's the author of a book entitled How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen. David is a remarkable voice in American life, and his perception of what's going on in our country is certainly one of those voices that many people pay attention to. And I'm grateful that today, in a way that is complementary to the conversation we had last week, David's going to take us into some exchange around one of the issues that most divides our country, and that has to do with the role of meritocracy and elitism. Those things are defining to the political moment, but also to the social moment that we're in, and raise all kinds of significant questions that any person that's taking our nation's life seriously needs in some way or another to grapple with. Welcome, David. So glad to have you again.
Good to be back.
You know, there's an amazing article that you've written that I want to focus our conversation on today. It's an article that's entitled, How the Ivy League Broke America. The Meritocracy Isn't Working. We Need Something New. This is an article that's the cover article of The Atlantic in December, and it's an article that is trying to look at the way that meritocracy works, especially intellectual meritocracy, especially IQ, but even more money meritocracy that guides and shapes so much of the American educational system, especially among the elite. So let's just begin by inviting you to summarize the piece, and then we'll get into some of its parts.
Yeah. So every nation has a social ideal. And for the first half of the 20th century and the last half of the 19th century, our social ideal was the well-bred man. And so if you wanted to get into Harvard, what matters is, did your dad go to Harvard? And so what they really wanted to promote the people who had been on Mayflower families, who were well-bred, who were Protestant and white and male, but who had a certain level of manners and a certain sense of noblesse oblige toward the rest of society. And if you can think of everybody from Theodore Roosevelt to Franklin Roosevelt to George H.W. Bush, they all fit into that mold. Those guys, especially Franklin Roosevelt, could never have gotten into Harvard today. He didn't have the brain power, but he had a first-class temperament and a sense of service to the country. But then in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, the president of these Ivy League institutions said, we can't fight the Cold War run by the dim-witted children of Mayflower families. So they changed their selection criteria of what really matters. They changed their definition of ability. And it was no longer being well-bred and well-groomed. It was IQ. We just want smart people. If we're going to compete against the Soviets, we need the smartest people we can get. And so they shifted the criteria. So suddenly the SAT scores the average Harvard freshman in 1950, probably an SAT score of 500, which is okay, but not great. By 1970, it was probably 700. And the idea was that they were going to recruit the smartest people from around the country. It would be more fair.
Yes.
And the problem with it, that the rich people rigged the system. And so they realized they could invest massively in their kids and boost their SAT scores, boost their grades. And so now if you come from a family in the top 1%, your odds of going to an Ivy League school are 77 times higher than if you come from a poorer family. And a lot of schools around the country have more students in the top 1% than the bottom 60%. Second, they've created a caste system. Since the rich people can pass on their advantages down to their kids, we now have this chasm between the children of the affluent and the children of the non-affluent. By 8th grade, children of the affluent are 4 grade levels higher than children of the non-affluent. People who grow up in college-educated homes live 8 years longer than people with high school-educated homes. They're 5 times less likely to die of opioid addiction. They're 22 times less likely to have children out of wedlock. They're 2.5 times less likely to say they have no close friends. And so we've just created a hereditary aristocracy in this society. And it has created a populist backlash. And people look and say the top 20% of this country they have all the university credentials, they have all the degrees, they get all the fancy jobs, and they have too much cultural power, too much corporate power, too much economic power, too much media power. We're in revolt against them. So to me, the creation of this 2-caste system has created this populist backlash, which Donald Trump is part of.
Right.
And so the history of the meritocracy is different definitions of the word merit. What is ability really? And I think that definition that merit is about IQ was a false definition. IQ is important, but it's not 70% of what you want to know about a person.
Right.
Like when we're marrying someone, when we're hiring somebody, what matters? Are they good team players? Do they have humility? Do they have virtue? Do they try hard? There are all sorts of things that are way more important than just raw processing power.
Right.
But we've been blind to that, and we've led our country astray because of that false definition of what ability is.
Well, I do think that, while this has been commented on in other places, I certainly, and you yourself have written about it other places as well, I do think that what you've captured in this longer piece in the Atlantic is a much more of a map of what that topography actually looks like. As you were doing this research and discovering some of the statistics that you just told us about, what were some of the surprises or shocks, even as people, as each of us are, both you and I are inside that meritocracy system to our benefit? What were some of the things that surprised you the most about what you saw?
I think just how little IQ matters. Like IQ is important. It's probably like the dumb way I'd summarize it is it's 30% of what you need to know about a person to know how they'll do in life. But grades, for example, our meritocracy measures people by how they do in school. The definition of intelligence is academic ability.
Right.
What's the correlation between getting good grades in school and doing well in life?
Yes.
The correlation is basically 0. That doing well in school is not a good predictor of how you're going to do well in life. And that makes sense. Like in school, you have teachers telling you what to do. All you have to do is comply.
Yes.
In life, you don't get to do that.
Right.
In school, it's all individualistic. How can I outcompete my fellow students?
Yes.
In life, it's mostly about teams. Like, how do we do together?
Right. Right.
And so the bankruptcy, we have a basic non sequitur. We measure people by how they do in one setting, which is the classroom. And then we use that to declare how prepared they are for another setting, which is the workplace. And this is just a non sequitur. And then what I try to do in the piece is round up a lot of the critiques of the meritocracy that have been made. And that's just a Reader's Digest, like rounding it up. But then what I try to do is, well, if IQ is not the best definition of ability, what is?
Yes.
And so to me, I go back to Augustine. We're on your podcast, so I might as well go to a Christian thinker.
Please.
And Augustine said we're primarily not thinking creatures, we're primarily desiring creatures. And there's a quote I put in there, but I think my editor took it out, from Leon Kass, the great philosopher at the University of Chicago, who said, what defines a person is not the color of their skin. It's not the processing power of their brain. What defines a person is the ruling passion of their soul. And are you a person who seeks pleasure? Are you a person who seeks understanding? Are you a person who seeks selfless love? And not only what are your primary desires, but how good are you at regulating your desires? How good are you when you have a short-term desire to eat cake and a long-term desire to lose weight? How good are you at pursuing your long-term desire?
Right, right.
And so we become what we love, as Augustine said.
Right.
But that's non-cognitive. To put it in crude geographic terms, IQ is the prefrontal cortex. That's behind your forehead. Your desires are created in the midbrain, in the dopamine systems and all those systems.
Right.
And to me, that stuff, the desire, is hard to measure. It's hard to evaluate. You can't just give somebody an SAT test and say, what are your desires? But that's the crucial piece of a person. And we sort people now by the things that are easier to quantify and measure, not the things that really matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I hope to do in this piece is to give people an idea of what it would look like to measure not the things that are easy to count, but the things that really matter in determining a life.
Right, right. Take, let's say, the predominant emotion of the era that I would say is fear, and run it through the gauntlet of what you've just said, because I think it exposes why what you're saying is so important.
Yeah, well, the one I admire most is desire, as I said. And desire is and curiosity. Let's call it curiosity. Okay. That's the love of learning.
Yes.
And to me, the people who really matter in life are not the bright, shiny 18-year-olds. They're the people who just keep getting better day after day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, just take a very famous, obvious example. Warren Buffett was pretty smart. He's a smart guy. But what marks Warren Buffett more than anybody who competes in the world of finance, which is filled with plenty smart guys, he never stopped learning.
Mm-hmm.
He just woke up every day as, I want to learn more. And my life is going to be about learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires being a really good self-teacher.
Yes.
And so I taught at Yale for many years, and I used to tell my students, 70% of you are going to be more boring at age 30 than you are right now. Because you're plenty smart. You're just not curious.
Right.
And right now you have professors forcing you to ask the big questions.
Yes.
But when those professors go away, you're just going to slip into a professional rut.
Yes, yes.
And so the ability to keep asking yourself the big questions.
Right.
And to keep reconsidering those questions. And that is the desire for understanding.
Yes, yes.
And so even like I happen to be listening on an audiobook to Tina Turner's memoir.
Uh-huh.
And I'm now in the book where she's being abused brutally by Ike Turner. And she didn't know how to get to be a woman with her own voice. But over the years, she developed this ability to grow.
Yes.
And so a woman who was meek and submissive in the face of really abusive treatment discovered her voice, discovered her will,
yes,
discovered some sense of dignity and self-respect. And that's just an awesome feat of growth.
Yes.
And so to me, what matters is being a grower.
Right.
The ability to keep growing. So you're a better person at 70 than you were at 60, and you're better at 60 than you were at 50. And you can't measure that by measuring who's a shiny 18-year-old.
Right. You know, just recently, one of my most beloved faculty members at Fuller, William Pinnell, passed away. And I was with him just a couple of weeks before he died. And we were discussing a book that I had read that I found really challenging and interesting. And he said, oh, I need to get that book and read it. And he was 95 and he was clearly in massive decline. And yet on his virtual deathbed, he was saying, no, I want to keep learning. I want to keep understanding. Not only did that typify him, it typified in a way that the affluence of his impact, because he inspired that ongoing temperamental inclination of wanting, of curiosity, as you're saying.
Now, this is what's inspiring about humanity. My dad's 89, and he's in a senior community in Pennsylvania. And I had dinner with him and a bunch of his friends, and the guy to my right was 100. And so I said, well, what do you say to somebody who's 60? Like, what do you say? And the first thing he said was, well, getting old takes guts. Your friends die, you get sick, it takes guts. So that was an introduction. But then we spent the rest of the dinner talking about different books he was reading. This guy's 100.
Right.
I'd venture to say his sex drive has probably gone away, and a lot of his other drives have probably gone away. But the curiosity drive, that doesn't go away.
Right.
And the lecture halls of America are filled with people in their 60s and 70s who are still, they want to learn. They want to know more. And it's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. It's a remarkable thing. In addition to curiosity, one of the things that you highlight as one of the things that we most need is a sense of drive and mission. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think the sense of having a purpose. And I don't even mean that, our world is divided between people who want to make it overly cognitive.
Right.
And so they say, we set goals. We should set goals. And of course, the mind is always thinking about the future. And that's one of the nice things about the human mind. It's a prediction machine. It's anticipating the future. And when we become curious, it's because something unexpected has happened.
Yes.
And we want to understand. And so to me, that drive for the future, to get better, to dare, and to be bold. And to me, this is a little about America. There was a guy named Henri de Crevecoeur who came over here and forgive my French accent, came over here in, I guess, the 18th century, from France, became a farmer. And he said, when you're in France, to walk a mile seems like a really long way. But when you come here to America, to walk 20 miles is just nothing. And he said, coming to this country, it inflames your desires. And you want to move more, you want to dare more, you want to create more. And I think that's one of the geniuses of the United States, not only the United States, but when European settlers came here in the 17th century,
yes,
they saw abundance like they'd never imagined, like forests stretching on for thousands of miles. They saw oysters bigger than they'd ever seen. They saw flocks of geese so big it took them 45 minutes to take off.
Yes.
And they had two thoughts. One is that God's plan for humanity could be completed here on this continent. And two, they could get really rich in the process.
Right.
And so we've been driven by this moral materialism ever since. And to me, it's one of the most attractive things about the country. Sometimes it leads us to be crass and materialistic, but it means that we have energy.
Right.
And to me, that quality of energy, of just like constant motion, constant. Mm-hmm. And here, you don't have to live the way I chose to live, but, if you're the Dalai Lama or a subscriber to certain Eastern religions or to Stoicism, the emphasis on dispatching your desires, reducing your desires so you can have tranquility. Mm-hmm. And different strokes for different folks. It's not the way I choose to live. My family was an immigrant family, and we don't want happiness. We want intensity. Mm-hmm. I am happiest when my life is being directed by a controlling purpose.
Yes.
And I feel as Vincent Van Gogh said, I'm in it with all my heart.
Yes, yes.
And I'm dissatisfied because I'm not where I want to be.
Right.
But that's what I admire. One of the people I admire, for example, is the artist Paul Cézanne.
Yes.
And Cézanne wanted to become a painter at 17. Complete failure by 25. Complete failure by 30. He was just not that good. At 40, his best friend from childhood and the novelist Émile Zola wrote a book called L'Oeuvre, The Work. Mm-hmm. And the book is about a young writer who becomes a global star and his best friend, the painter, who's a failure and commits suicide. And so that was about Cézanne.
Right.
But then at age 60, Cézanne just keeps getting better and better and better. And by 65, people are coming to watch him paint. And by his death, Picasso says he's the founder of modern art.
Right, right.
And so we emphasize the young, but to me, the ability to just keep getting better every day of your life is just a tremendously brave and admirable quality.
I'm Mark Labberton. Thanks for listening with me. I do know that, for example, Yo-Yo Ma, who is obviously so highly regarded for the precision and elegance, utter beauty of his playing, is himself as a person about so much more than just music. He's really interested in the way that music as an aspect of life enables human thriving to occur, right? So one of the things that makes his impact so pervasive, so much bigger than just being, as it were, the world's best cello player, is that his own vision and mission is so much more encompassing and multidimensional, and therefore for people who may or may not ever be elite musicians, but who share in this inclination toward a passionate humanity or a passionate humanism. And I do think that is one of the things that is infectious about his playing. So you even feel that in the variety and style of his repertoire and the various risks that he's taken as a classical musician to do so many non-quote classical things is all part of the embodiment in his life of, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah. I hope you won't mind me telling the story, but many years ago I was at a lunch with him, and a third person at the lunch said, what's your identity? Who are you? And I said, well, I'm a writer. That's my identity. And he said, I'm a people person. And I said to him, really? You're a cellist. I would think you're a musician. And he said, no, I really love people. And I said, really? If I put you on a desert island with a bunch of people and no cello, you'd be happy? And he said, absolutely.
Wow.
And when you hang around Yo-Yo, he's like, he meets a person, any person, and it's like he's never met a human being before.
Right.
It's like, look at these creatures. They're amazing.
Yes.
And there's another one. And there's another one. He's so joyous because of his delight in humanity.
Right. Right.
And so that's a higher aspiration than the thing he's also so great at, which is playing the cello. But as you say, the love of humanity infuses the way he uses his wrists to play the cello.
And this is partly why the quality or characteristic that you're describing is not class bound, and it's not performance defined. It's being defined, and it's who of who we are and how we live that actually ends up becoming this kind of infectious impact that people can bring, like a Yo-Yo Ma obviously does in a very exceptional way. But ordinary people in very, very ordinary circumstances can carry the same burden of the discovery of the person and the individual and the magnetism of a developing humanity. It's really it's one of the joys I always felt about being a pastor was that there was a group of people that I was called to just give exceptional attention to over a period of time through all of the peaks and valleys of their lives from birth to death and everything in between. And there was something about that felt like I was always ringside in the human experience and in the experience of what it meant to be a community and in the spiritual experience of what it meant to be a Christian community, trying to live humanly and with a kind of capaciousness of engagement and love and the pursuit of justice and mercy and truth into society and culture. It's one of the reasons why the church in Berkeley that I served, First Pres, is a church that has clear glass walls. And I've always loved that, so that everything weird and wonderful in Berkeley is in some sense surrounding the church, inside the church, outside the church, and it's that dynamic that's all about what I think the gospel is really calling us to engage and to discover ourselves. So it's obviously one of the things that attracts me, David, about your own work and about your own inclination toward these things. Tell us a little bit more about social intelligence, because in the article, you write a lot about just IQ, as you've commented on already. But social intelligence is a different kind of intelligence than simply IQ. And it's a big piece of your work over decades, not just in this very brief form in this article, but just talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah. I should say a pet peeve that my editors put that phrase social intelligence in there, but I don't like that phrase.
What phrase would you choose?
It implies that being good with people is a form of intelligence. It still assumes that intelligence is the primary virtue.
Yes, I did wonder about that.
It's not intelligence. It's sympathy, it's empathy, it's having a theory of mind, it's having curiosity about other human beings. And so if you ask people, why are people fired from your firms? In 11% of cases, according to research, people are fired because they lack the technical ability to do the job. In 89% of cases, it's because people are poor teammates. They're uncoachable. They lack the basically friendship skills. And then the other bit of research I'd said, which I think I said in the article, is that somebody looked at financial planners who are superstar performers at their firm. And then they quit their firm because they get lured away for more money at another firm. And their results plummet over the next 5 to 10 years because the talent they had was not in their own brain. It was in the team around them. And the same holds true, by the way, of surgeons. Surgeons are very different when they're performing with the people that usually perform surgery versus a bunch of strangers. And so talent doesn't inhere in the individual, it inheres in the team.
Yes.
And what makes a good team? It's not the IQ of the individuals. It's the ability to take turns while talking.
Yes.
It's the ability to volley ideas and to feed into a common funnel of thought. And so that's a form of social adeptness that is just super important. And so we all understand that in our firms, but we don't sort for that in our schools. And so, for example, one of the things I wish we did, and I talked about this in the piece, is more of what they call project-based learning. And so there's a school, I saw a documentary, it's called High Tech High, it's in San Diego, it's a bunch of schools actually. But they showed a bunch of kids, and they were in part of teams, there are no classroom periods, there are no grades in these schools. But you're part of a team of 15, and you have to study why civilizations decline and fall. What are the different factors? And not only do you have to study this, you have to make this big wooden gizmo that exemplifies all the causes like economic decline, social distrust, political corruption. And you have to build this gizmo with all these levers and gears and stuff like that to exemplify it. So you're not only studying it, you're working together to build this gizmo.
Yes.
And to me, that's what life is like.
Yeah.
We're trying to understand a complex circumstance, reduce it to its core values, and then build some practical manifestation of the response.
Right.
And one of the things that has helped me is a beautiful book called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf by a guy named John Coates. And he was a stock trader who survived a lot of the dot-com crash and other crashes, bubbles and crash. And he was so fascinated by this experience that he went on to become a neuroscientist. And he said, why did we all get caught up in these crashes, these bubbles, and which then caused us to lose all this money? We're supposed to be these rationalized creatures.
Yes.
And he found out that the people who got out of the bubble in the right time and didn't lose their shirts, they were really good at measuring their heart rate. They were aware of where their body was. Mm-hmm. And so they could say to themselves, my testosterone is just surging right now. Something is going on, and we're all being caught up in a mass hypnosis.
Right.
And because they were really adept at reading their own body, they could get out. And one of the points this neuroscientist makes is the mind is not built for problem solving. The mind is built for motion. That we do in life, we don't solve problems. We navigate complex terrains. Mm-hmm. And even if we're just doing a research project, we're navigating an opportunity space. Where's my research going to lead me? Where's it not? And so it takes a lot of emotional agility to move in that way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the more theological way to put it is we're all pilgrims, and we're all searching for the journey that will transform us. And so the mind is not this computer designed to solve problems. The mind has helped us navigate through a space.
Yes.
And if we do it well, then we come out transformed. But it's a radically different view. And he writes in this book, if you think of your mind as there to solve movement rather than solve problems, then you will think about yourself very differently. And I have to say, as I've gone through life since I read that book, I really do think of myself as, look, I'm moving through a problem space here.
Right.
How deft am I as a navigator?
Yes, yes. So let's take that analogy and apply it to what we discussed on the last episode when you were here, discussing really the election and post-election reflections you've been having. How does this article and the points you've just been making, how does it help us at a time when there is still so much fracture, so much vulnerability, so much pain, so much of a sense of disconnection and division? How does what you're describing help us?
Well, if you segregate your society on IQ, you're inherently segregating on elitist grounds. Because basically IQ, you've created, it's a false construct. I want to be able to give you a test. I want to measure the same thing in every human being, and I want the answer to come out in a bell curve.
Yes.
And so I'm going to lop off the top 5%, and they'll be the select, and the bottom 95% will be the non-select.
Yes, yes.
And so if you measure that way, you're inherently creating an elitist society.
Right.
Second, you're going to get a bounce back. But second, it's not even the most important thing. You're not evaluating people by the right measure.
Right.
Like since we started the meritocracy, like back in the days when the stuck-up WASP blue bloods ran society, like they were a bunch of stuck-up blue bloods who wouldn't allow a lot of us into their clubs and things like that. But they did give us the Progressive Era, the New Deal, the Marshall Plan. It was kind of impressive. Since the meritocrats took over, we've had the financial crisis, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the rebellion that is Donald Trump. So I wouldn't say our leadership class, even though it's wonderfully more diverse than it was, and probably filled with smarter people, somehow we're not living up to our promise.
Right.
And a lot of people look at us and say, you people are not only looking down on us, but you're morons to boot. And so we've generated a hostility that in the way that John Foster Dulles and people like that did not generate. And so it's a bit of an indictment on us, and I think an indictment on the way we create our leadership class. And if you create something on, do you try hard? Yeah. Are you curious? Are you good with other people? Are you sympathetic? These are just way more democratically distributed to society.
Right.
And when Jesus was selecting his 12, he didn't give them all a bunch of standardized tests. Like, he wanted people
Touché.
who were normal and with the range of attributes and non-attributes. But he saw each person was made in the image of God. And if you're going to select people on the basis of their brain, you're inherently not selecting people on the quality of their soul and the yearnings of their soul and the yearnings of their heart.
Yes.
And to me, what, frankly, the Christian world offers us is a recentering of the human person.
Right. Right.
That is not primarily in the brain. It's
Right.
primarily in the controlling passions of your heart.
Right. The project of a reaffirmation, reconstitution, renewing of Christian humanism, which is what you're talking about, is really central to your work. It's central to Comment Magazine's work. It's central to Fuller Seminary's work. In many ways, that is at the core. The Christian project is a human project, but human in all of its dimensions, and not just in particular dimensions, like, for example, IQ. And there's a beauty about that, an attractiveness about that, which we've spoken about before, and which I just think is tapping into one of the deepest hungers that I at least see in people's lives. And when I've been talking with friends and neighbors of mine about the election results, it's been fascinating to see people who have shared, whether they are celebratory or whether they are depressed, those who have shared their own human experience about this moment are processing it really differently than those who are just doing the analytics of what the statistics say. Not that there's anything wrong with that analysis as well, but they're holding up a human experience of a human life that is not only theirs, but also an attentiveness to human lives that may not be theirs, but which are all the more vulnerable, all the more fearful, all the more concerned in light of election results. And I guess I would like maybe you to finish our time by just talking about this project of a recovery of Christian humanism, which is so central to the common work that I think you and your wife and the work of Comment and the work of Fuller, and I hope the work of this podcast are really about.
Yeah, I mean, Christian humanism, some people hear the word humanism and hear secularism, but that's not what it means in this context. It means, like, what is the image of the human? And ecce homo, it's Jesus is the ultimate image of humanity.
Right.
And we have this thing that Rene Girard, the Stanford's, I guess he was a philosopher, talked about, mimetic desire, that we learn our desires from others, we copy.
Yes.
And that has its downside, that we all decide to copy whatever Taylor Swift wants at the given moment, which is fine. I live my life that way. But we should also live in imitation of Christ. And to me, that is mimetic desire in the best possible sense, that
yes.
we live in trying to live up to that human.
Yes.
And there's a colleague I have at the University of Chicago named Agnes Collard, who distinguishes between ambition and aspiration. And ambition is desire to make yourself big in the world, to have an impact in the world, and that's fine. But aspiration is desire to transform yourself.
Yes. Yes.
To become a better version of yourself, to do moral formation.
Yes. Yes.
And to me, that's far more important. And my favorite definition of moral formation comes from the Gospel of Ted Lasso, which is, Lasso was asked in the first season, what's your goal for your football team, FC Richmond? And he says, my goal is to make these fellas better versions of themselves on and off the field. That's just a fantastic one-sentence definition of what moral formation is.
Right.
And there really, as faithful people, that's what we're trying to do, but we
Yes.
have God's love breathing into us.
Yes.
That is an inspiration, that is elevating, that lifts us up, and that is like the homing beacon
Yes.
toward that side of aspiration, that sort of transformation.
Right.
And to me, that's the way to orient your life. But it's become benumbed in our culture.
Yes.
Because and we struggle, believe me, I struggle with this every day, with the snares of ambition. And I'm for ambition. I believe people should try to make a difference in the world. But if you make that your ultimate allegiance, obviously that's going to lead you into strange quarters.
Right. Right.
Which is where we've been led.
Yeah. When I wrote the first chapter of a book right after the 2016 election, the book was entitled Still Evangelical. And I was trying to describe what I thought the election had told us about the state of evangelicalism. And I said, the question in my mind is not really, am I still an evangelical? It's more, am I yet evangelical? Meaning, am I yet like the image of Christ who I seek to follow? And what your article and so much of your writing does, David, is lift up that kind of aspiration, not in a religious format necessarily, but undergirded by this kind of moral and I would say theological and spiritual vision of what the human is really centered in and what we are really for. And once again, you just continue to be, for me, and I know for just so many people, one of the great voices of our nation. And I really can't thank you enough for all of the many ways that is manifest in your work, whether it's through your writing or through your role on PBS or whatever else it might be. I just say thank you, and thank you for this time together.
Oh, thank you, Mark. You've been obviously, you've been a major figure in my life, going back to many years ago when I had lunch with John Stott up until today. So I'm grateful to be in your wake.
Well, God bless you. Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. Peter Labberton is our engineer and editor. Evan Rosa is our producer. For more information about Comment Magazine, visit comment.org, where you can subscribe, read the current magazine issue, and browse their archive. Fuller Seminary is an evangelical, multi-denominational graduate institution committed to providing indispensable formational education for diverse Christian leaders everywhere. For information, visit fuller.edu. I'm your host, Mark Labberton. Thanks for listening with me.